Wiki, your right-wing English teacher, here when what looks like I'm on a stakeout, and I guess in a way I am, but wanted to discuss something from Hamlet that I think is one of the finer points that goes undetected much of the time, especially if you just pay attention to the beauty of the language. And the language is beautiful, don't get me wrong. But if you just focus on the poetic means in which certain ideas are conveyed, you miss the deeper undercurrent of what's being said in this scene. And what's being said in this scene is something that I think is very important to talk about with respect to the state of mind that we know today, many of us know today as depression. It could also be called melancholia. I'm not really sure what the proper name for it is. I mean, the trendy thing to call it today is depression. To say somebody's depressed, to say that they've battled clinical depression or bouts of depression and that sort of thing. Today, depression is spoken of as if it were some scientifically verifiable thing in and of itself, as opposed to something more impressionistic of a concept. And don't get me wrong, again, it's real, but I don't know whether it can be defined so easily as you'd find in the DSM handbook, where they discuss it and discuss all the details and aspects of it as if it were, a particular kind of physical disease. It's a disease of the psyche. It's a disease of the spirit. It's a malady of the mind. And it's something that Hamlet knows quite well and speaks of very movingly and very profoundly. Hamlet is often called the melancholy Dane. That's what the title that he's been given. But I want to focus particularly on Act 2, Scene 2. And this is the scene in which Hamlet is confronted by Rosencrantz and Gilderntern. Now, the context of this scene is interesting to consider, I think useful to consider, crucial to consider in and of itself. Because Hamlet has very mixed feelings about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They are friends of his from way back. The three of them go way back. They have so many good memories that they shared. And when he greets them at the beginning of the scene, his pleasure at seeing them, I think, is unfeigned. I think it's very real. I think he's quite happy to meet them. It's not clear how long it's been since they've been together, since they've all hung out together, the three of them. But Hamlet is very happy to see them, and then just a short time later, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe as long as 2 minutes later, depending on how it's played, Hamlet, he's no dummy. He knows that something is up. And he becomes aware that these two guys, these old friends of his, aren't just paying him a visit out of courtesy. They aren't just coming by because it's been so long and they really need to catch up on what's been going on between the three of them and so forth. And by the way, it's always kind of funny that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are so joined at the hip. It's a little bit of a comedic thing. It's almost like they're a comedy duo. They're not brothers that we know of. They're just a couple guys who know each other, but they're almost interchangeable, one with the other. When you picture one of them, it's hard to picture who one of them is without picturing the other one. They're two voices, but they seem to be almost an identical character. And what they are is men who have been bought off. They've been bought off by the system. They've been, in a sense, corrupted. Now, we don't want to go too far and hold them responsible for too much here and speak of them, too damningly, I don't think. Because it's not clear. Yes, they've been corrupted. Yes, they're being paid off. They've shown up here in Elsinore to speak to Hamlet at the behest of Claudius. Although they don't admit this at first, Hamlet gets it out of them. He finally says, no. I know why you're here. Come on, just tell me. And at first they say, well, we don't know what you're talking about. And then he keeps at it just relentlessly until they finally say, okay, yeah, you're right, we were sent for. But it's possible, there are different ways of interpreting this. It's possible that they were sent for, that they were bought off, but with benevolent aims, with benevolent intentions. They made this compact with the king, with Claudius, who maybe they should have known, became king under very suspicious conditions, but they still made this compact with him, even though the death of Hamlet's father definitely happened under strange circumstances that warrants investigation. But they went right to the power source and agreed to do the bidding of the man in power. But they might have done this, they might have taken the money, taken the loot, but at the same time they might have sincerely cared about Hamlet and sincerely wanted to see what was up with him. It's possible that they, still care for him, and they probably do, even if they've become more thoroughgoing scoundrels than I'm characterizing them as right now. They probably still have, fond thoughts about Hamlet, their old friend. Nevertheless, Hamlet smells a rat, smells a pair of rats, and he digs it out of them. And finally they say, yes, we were sent for. And then Hamlet launches into one of his many monologues. This monologue is a bit different than really many of the others. Maybe, in fact, I don't know this for sure, but it might be the only one of the monologues in the play that is not written in verse form. The dialogue is not in verse. It's simply what's it called? Prose. I guess they call it prose. There's a word for it. I can't think of it right now. I've been out of the racket for too long. I would know what to call it. But it's the opposite of when you have iambic pentameter, lines of dialogue, one after another. And usually in Shakespeare plays, when a character speaks in this manner, it's often, a character who is speaking doggerel. It's like the comic relief. It's somebody who's I don't know who's providing some kind of break between one important part of the play and the other, and another. And sometimes this lack of prose, or this lack of verse, lack of dialogue in verse, or dialogue in prose form rather than verse, sometimes it signifies an absence of profundity, or an absence of really insight. I'm thinking here of Julius Caesar, where there are, after Caesar is murdered, there are two speeches that are given. One is given by Brutus. Brutus's speech is in prose form. It's not in verse. It's not a bad speech, but it's just kind of, it's so-so. It's good enough for the people who are assembled, the fickle mob. But then, after Brutus's speech, Mark Antony gives his famous speech. This speech of, it's incredibly manipulative. It's an incredibly, it's a very political speech. It's a very rabble-rousing speech, but it's a great speech, and it's one which contains more immediacy, more profundity, and it's in verse. So that's one example of contrasting prose and verse in, if prose is the word that I'm looking for, in Shakespeare. So that was a lengthy sidebar there, but getting back to this scene at hand, Act 2, Scene 2. In this scene, Hamlet takes a moment after he gets his friends to acknowledge, yes, we were sent for, yes, we are not just here to see you out of the goodness of our hearts. We are in league with the king to do this. And, the king wants us to know what's going on with you, why you're acting this way, what's causing your behavior to be why you're behaving so strangely lately. So much in Hamlet is spying. It's espionage. It's intelligence. It really is the surveillance state, the play of the surveillance state in so many ways. People spying on each other, people coming and approaching each other under false, under pretensions of being something that they aren't. This happens, scene after scene after scene in the play. It's a very prominent theme of Hamlet. But Hamlet is able to put it all aside, or is able to get them to admit why they're really there, and then he goes into this extraordinary speech, which again is in prose rather than in verse. For some reason, even though these are beautiful words, okay, so it's not a scene of doggerel, or like what you'd hear one of the lower born characters going on and on about something. Hamlet is incapable of not speaking profoundly, even when he's just joking around, even when he's just being obnoxious. There's always something to what he's saying. Though this be madness, yet there is method in it, as Polonius notes at one point. So, after his friends say, yes, we were sent for, then Hamlet says, I shall tell you why. And he then tells them about his state of mind. And he says, if I'm remembering, I probably won't remember every single word of this, and I don't have it in front of me. Probably remember most of it, though. He says, I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. Now that's a pretty pretty extreme statement, isn't it? I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. What is mirth? Mirth is joy. He's lost all of it. He hasn't just lost it. He hasn't just, he's not just, sad more often than he's happy these days. He doesn't know what happiness is. He doesn't know what joy is. It's all gone. It's flown away. It's left him in the dust. He lives a mirthless existence now. Is he being hyperbolic here? I don't think so. I think he's telling it like it is. Hamlet is not one to bitch and moan and whine. He's in the way that he's speaking here. He's not indulging in self-pity. He's telling the truth, manfully. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. And then he goes into talking about, he goes into a description of the physical world. He says, this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. Okay. And then he says, I'll go a little bit further, and then I want to talk about what he's saying. So what the full dimension of what he's saying here, the full meaning of what he's saying, which often gets lost. So this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, the atmosphere, look you. This brave o'erhanging firmament, talking about the sky, this majestical roof, fretted with golden fire, talking about the sun. Why, it appears no other thing to me but a foul and pestilent congregation of vapor. All right, so beautiful poetic language here. And he says he talks about the earth as a goodly frame. And this most excellent canopy, the air, the atmosphere, is an excellent canopy. He speaks of the horizon and the sky is this brave o'erhanging firmament, this majestical roof, fretted with golden fire. What a way of talking about nature! I mean, this is language that you would hear from a nature lover, who also is a poet, has the soul of a poet, but also someone who just appreciates the beauty of everything, the beauty of this God-fashioned creation. But what is he saying about it? He's saying, this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, the spray overhanging firmament, just the earth fretted with fire. Why, it appears, talking about the same thing that he was praising a moment ago, the same beautiful world that he was just gushing with praise about mere moments earlier. Now he says, why, it appeareth no other thing to me but a foul and pestilent congregation of vapor. Vapor, something, smelly, and insubstantial, but what there is of it, it's foul, it's unpleasant. So what is he saying here? The world that he's saying, if I can just, put it in a sentence, he's saying, the world is great and wonderful, but to me, it's foul, disgusting, and terrible. So he's acknowledging the reality of things. The reality of things is glorious. But what is it to him? Well, I'm getting ahead of myself there with that line. But anyway, to him, this glorious sight of the world, it's nothing but a sterile promontory and a foul and pestilent congregation of vapor. This is what he says about the world. Speaking in very general terms to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, right? He's not saying anything about what happened to his father, but I think he's still he's maybe being careful not to let them in on anything specific, like what he found out from the ghost or anything like that. But he does, now that they have leveled with him about who they really are and what they really, why they're really there, he's capitulating with, not capitulating, he's reciprocating by telling them the truth of his own state of mind. Okay, so he talks about the world, and then he goes on to talk about man. And he says famously, "What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals." This is man. Man is the beauty of the world. Out of all the greatness of creation, man is what God has capped his creation with. He's the paragon of animals. He's the highest of all the animals. He's, all of the animals are alive, and they all testify to the goodness of the world, the greatness of the Creator, but man stands above them all. These are not ironic words. Again, just like what he was saying about the world, about how great the world is, how beautiful it is, how wonderful it is, he's saying the same thing here about man. What a piece of work is a man. That's the phrase, piece of work. Whenever you hear somebody saying, boy, so-and-so is a real piece of work, you know that? This is where it comes from. So what a piece of work is a man, how noble in reason, infinite in faculty, in form and moving, express and admirable, how like an angel, in action and in apprehension, in his ability to use reason, how like a god. So Hamlet is saying, man is great. Man is a wonder. And he's not saying it ironically. Okay, he really means it. But what does he say after that? Beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, and yet, what is it to me, this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me. This quintessence of dust. So everything that he'd been talking about before, all of these glorious aspects of man, all these glorious characteristics of man, what are they to him? What is this quintessence of dust to him? Again, that calls to mind, of course, the line, remember, O man, you are dust, and to dust you shall return, which is a refrain that's said on Ash Wednesday, when the priest puts the cross on your forehead. Man is a quintessence of dust, calling attention to man being a creature of no account, ultimately, in spite of all of the grand and grandiloquent words that were used to describe him before. So just like nature, the world is wonderful, but it's a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. It's wonderful, but to me it's terrible. Earlier in that speech, he says Denmark's a prison, and he says the whole world's the world's a goodly prison full of confines, wards, and dungeons. Denmark being one of the worst. So the world is a prison. The world is wonderful, yet it's terrible. Man is great and glorious, but what does it mean to me, this quintessence of dust? Man is just a quintessence of dust. He's nothing. Man delights not me, he says. And then, seeing that they're maybe trying to cheer him up a little bit, from going off on this morose little monologue, seeing them snicker, Hamlet's having none of it. He says, No, nor woman neither. So so again, man and woman both are quintessence of dust, the creatures who delight not him. And again, he's speaking very vaguely, but very truthfully, and I think very profoundly about his state of mind. And this is depression. Depression is when you understand that the world is a wonderful place and that people are wonderful, or can be wonderful, that you have so many things to be thankful for, that you have great children, that you have a great family, that you have great friends, that you have a lot to be thankful for in your life. But at the same time, it means nothing to you. These things that should delight you simply don't delight you. In fact, they're the opposite. Because this cloud has fallen over everything. And, you don't want to see things differently. You don't want for your joy to be gone. You don't want for your mirth to have evaporated. And in some ways, it's a mystery to you why it ever happened. I mean, in Hamlet's case, he can maybe talk about having lost his father and then seeing his mother remarry his uncle, both of which were terrible events for him. But one wonders, were those the precipitating events that caused him to fall into melancholy, or does his melancholy have an origin that transcends these events? We don't know, and it's impossible to say from the information that we're given. Hamlet certainly doesn't come across as moping and morose all of the time. Sometimes he's a lot of fun. Sometimes he's very funny. Sometimes he's very cordial and what's the word for it? Gracious with others. Other times he very definitely isn't. But he's energetic. He enjoys wrestling with ideas. He's gifted with, intelligence, an incredible intelligence. So great that it just dwarfs everything else on the screen or on the stage. The character of Hamlet eclipses everything and everybody. But in spite of all of this, in spite of everything, he is without joy, without mirth. And a lot of us can understand this, I think. Even though we know we've got reasons to be happy, we're not. And we can see behind the veil of our melancholy into the reality of what is great and wonderful about the world, but that doesn't help us to know the joy that we knew before. It doesn't get us back to that joy at all. But we acknowledge it. We acknowledge that it's there. We acknowledge its existence. It's not like just saying, "Oh, it's all terrible. It's all phony." No, there's no good to anything whatsoever. Man sucks. The world sucks. Everything sucks. And that's that. That's not what Hamlet is saying. Not at all. And that's not what people who are depressed, I think, usually would say. Or people battling physical ailments or illnesses. And I mean, all of this, maybe it's all of a piece, whether it's psychological, whether it's spiritual, whether it's physical, it's all of a piece. It's all the same thing. You know, when you're in pain, when you suffer physically, if you have a chronic pain that's debilitating to one extent or other, you know what it's like to not be in pain. You remember how it is to have escaped pain, to be outside of pain. And when you're afflicted in mind or spirit, you still know that there's a reality that is unafflicted. There is bliss, there is joy, there is mirth. It's just beyond your apprehension, and you don't think that you're ever going to be able to get back to it. This is the state of mind that Hamlet is depicting here. I think I'll stop there. I could go on, but I won't.